Hi, I'm Kate Lynch Machado, Summit's Director of Client Development. Welcome to our webinar, and it's during Infrastructure Week, which is a celebration and awareness week for all things infrastructure. We are ready to kick off Summit Consulting's webinar called Build Bridges and Avoid Pitfalls when Financing Infrastructure Programs. Before we get started, I wanted to go over a few housekeeping items with you. All audio and video have been turned off except for our moderator and panelists. We'll be taking questions throughout the webinar. We just ask that you enter them into the chat and we'll respond to them as we can. There will be 3 polls taken during the webinar, so please plan on participating. This is also being recorded and will be sent out to all attendees after the webinar. So if there are no immediate questions, we can go ahead and get started. As I mentioned, this is a webinar about infrastructure, and we're going to explore a few things that you'll need to know to set up new grant loan programs under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which is also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which we refer to as IIJA, or just as the Infrastructure Act. You may hear us referring to those titles about that legislation today. So we understand that if they're saying one, it's all the same legislation. We just may be calling it different things on shorthand. During the webinar, we'll share tips and key insights on what to consider when setting up new grant programs and loan programs. And this includes a special focus on the entire life cycle of a program from the start, not just getting the applications out the door, but also payment processes, reporting, data gathering, and measuring performance. We're also going to have a section and discussion about ensuring equity in the process, and kind of a snapshot of what's the difference between a new program and an add-on to existing programs. So to kick off our webinar, we do have some poll questions. I'm going to start off the first 2 poll questions for you. If you go and respond, that would be helpful. And we'd like to hear from you about where you work or what kind of section of your job it refers to grants, loans, and programs. So are you the federal government, state program? Lisa will be sending putting that poll out. And if you can respond to that, that would be great. And get those submitted. And we're going to put this through here. And we'll take a quick moment. We have a lot of private sector folks, which is wonderful. Thank you so much. The second question is, do you have experience working on federal grant loan programs? Really easy answers here, which is either a yes or a no. And we would prefer if you kind of add that in, so we'll know kind of what you have background in and what we need to kind of give you more kind of an expansive description on certain subjects. Thanks so much for submitting that answer. So at this point, I'd like to actually introduce you to have our panelists introduce themselves to you, because it's great to know who you have talking to you about these great subjects. Chad, can you kick us off?
Absolutely, Kate. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chad Parker. I'm a subject matter expert with Summit Consulting, LLC. I've worked with Summit for just over 2 months now and have been engaged in the development of materials for a new federal loan and grant program. Prior to working for Summit Consulting, I worked with USDA Rural Development for over 31 years, and I served as Deputy Administrator for the Community Facilities Program, their telecommunications programs, business programs, and cooperative programs, and I was the Acting Deputy Administrator for their single-family housing programs. I also, of course, held numerous staff-level positions at USDA throughout my career. During that time, I oversaw the establishment of 5 new loan and grant programs, the Reconnect Rural Broadband Program, Tribal College Grants, Economic Impact Initiative Grants, the Rural Community Development Initiative, and most recently, the Emergency Rural Healthcare Grant Program. I also was in charge of administering numerous other loan and grant and technical assistance programs throughout that time. I look forward to our conversation today, and I'll kick it over to Kami.
Thanks, Chad. Hi, everyone. I'm Kami. I'm a consultant and program evaluator with Summit, working on evaluations for a variety of federal programs. So my experience and expertise is in mixed methods evaluations, which means that I use both qualitative methods like surveys and interviews and quantitative methods, such as using administrative data analysis and descriptive and predictive analytics. So I've served as a project manager and consultant at Summit on evaluations for agencies like the Small Business Administration, the Department of Labor, on topics ranging from loan programs to unemployment to internal acquisition planning, strategic planning, things like that. So prior to joining Summit, I received my master's in public policy from George Washington University, focusing in program evaluation and analysis. I actually received my BA in economics, but I got drawn to program evaluation because I enjoy how every evaluation is unique and has the potential for new methods, new ways of solving problems. So I am really excited to talk for our conversation today. Sam, why don't you?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Seong. I lead Summit's work in infrastructure finance programs. Summit supports a wide range of support to federal loan and grant programs over the entire life cycle of those programs. We also call that cradle to grave. However, I particularly enjoy our work setting up new programs in Summit. I've been fortunate to be at the birth of several new programs, such as EPA WIFIA, USDA Reconnect, the Treasury's Air Carrier Loan Program, and the Capital Projects Fund. Each new program brings a lot of unique challenges and perspectives. So I'm really looking forward to this channel.
Thank you to all for your introductions. I appreciate that. So as I mentioned at the start of the webinar, the focus of today's webinar and session is really to explore what it takes to kick off and administer grant loan programs following the passage of the Infrastructure Act. So the topics today include things like strategies for mitigating issues programs are currently facing implementing the Infrastructure Act, lessons learned from the early stages of the program lifecycle, particularly as it relates to infrastructure, and to discuss what can be done to improve loan and grant program implementation in the future. So we're going to ask our final polling question today, and then we can kind of really jump into the discussion. So you'll see that pop up on your screen. Please take a moment to answer that. It's, what topics are you really interested in hearing from our panelists about today? You can pick as many as you want, I think, or you can pick just one. And so we'll just kind of wait a minute for folks to be able to submit those answers and go from there. Thank you so much for participating in the poll. So as a reminder, you can submit your questions through the chat button during the webinar. We'll try to answer the questions during the webinar, and we'll make sure to get to your questions before we sign off today. We are ready to kick off the discussion with our panelists, and we really want to set the stage for what our discussion is about. And really, this is about infrastructure. Most of us think about building bridges, improving transportation, whether that be highways, roads in your neighborhoods or rail, and updating water systems. Sam, can you share a bit more about what those areas and others that fall into the Infrastructure Act and how they're being handled in that legislation?
Sure, Kate. So I think the topics you mentioned are traditionally what are thought of as infrastructure. So transportation, like roads, bridges, railroads, highways, also ports, and even airports and waterways. That's sort of the transportation infrastructure that is usually contemplated. Then there's the infrastructure around utilities like energy, water and wastewater, telecommunications like broadband, and also flood risk infrastructure. All of that is part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. There's a lot of new programs that address specific needs along those infrastructure topics or sectors, but it's a very broad authority.
Yeah, thank you so much. And anybody who's gone through a winter and has potholes or see bridges that are starting to crumbling, you're always happy to hear about the Infrastructure Act. So Chad, based on your experience and administrating new grant and loan programs, it'd be great if you could share how agencies and the staff members of those agencies that are, kind of implementing the act are, how they're tracking and approaching these programs.
Sure, happy to do so, Kate. I think from an agency perspective, a lot of the downstream impact on the organizations is going to depend upon whether it's a new authority that's in and appropriations that go along with that in the IIJA, or whether it's a supplement to an already established program. So the big difference there is if the authority and appropriations are a supplement to an already established program, it's going to allow the agency to move forward more easily with program rules and requirements, scoring and methodology, and even data collection. Since there's already regulations in place and scoring in place and an IT system in place for that original program, it allows the agency to go in and modify the systems a little bit, to tweak the regulations or scoring system and move forward much more quickly. But if it's a completely new program with new authorities and new appropriations, it often requires a whole lot of additional steps. Public listening sessions for stakeholders, notices that go out requesting for public input on the program. Then you've got drafting of regulations and either NOFAs or NOFOs, notices of funding availability or notice of funding opportunities. So you're ending up having to draft new pieces of that. There are new system development or either significant system modifications. And then even when you get all of those pieces in place, you've got to make sure the employees know the program well. So there's going to be detailed employee training, and you've got to make sure that the public knows the program well. So you're going to have to do a substantial amount of additional outreach to make sure that people are aware of the program and the interested parties will be able to come in and apply. I think the other agency level complication that comes along with a brand new program authority is that you get a lot of excitement around it, which is a great thing. You get a lot of excitement, people are interested, but that's going to bring in a lot of extra external stakeholder involvement. The external stakeholders are going to have opinions and thoughts about how the program should be run. You also then get an interest from the internal people. They see this as a real opportunity to make a difference, to create change, to do big things. So you have lots of thoughts and opinions, and often those are conflicting thoughts and opinions and differences around how the new program should be run. So you've got to work through that, and that usually takes additional time and additional workload and effort among the staff. And I think the last piece of the new program that I could think about is goes along with as far as equity is concerned. So there are two, I think, aspects that you have to consider with a new program when setting it up. You got to look at scoring, and you've got to look at a kind of detailed, focused outreach. With scoring, you go into the scoring methodology and you add a few points, additional priority points for things like persistent poverty counties or distressed areas. So you take those factors that kind of locate those areas where there's a real need, and you give those additional points so that it levels the playing field for those communities and those organizations to come in and compete in a competitive grant process. So you can do the scoring, and then with intensified outreach, where you send and do specific technical assistance out in those communities and are involved in very specified outreach, encouraging those leaders in those communities, the people with the capacity to apply, and the organizations that are kind of in the sphere of that program to consider applying for the application process is a way to make equity a good part of a new program as well. Kami?
Kate,
Yeah,
we
thanks,
did-
Chad.
sorry, we did have a question that came in. It's what types of assistance do applicants get to understand the programs and how to apply?
So I found that the best way is you put together first a beginning fact sheet so that people understand the basics of the program. You follow that up with additional detailed fact sheets on the application process. You go out and hold webinars, so you invite the public to come in and participate and hear from the people who are running the program about aspects of the program, different ways of applying. You also make sure that they're aware of all the technical assistance resources, things like frequently asked questions that are posted up on the web, and maybe an application guide. A lot of the new programs will put together an application guide to put that out there so that people can more easily work through the process.
All right, thank you, Chad.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. I actually wanted to jump in because a lot of the points you just made about setting up a program are very important to consider when thinking about setting up the evaluation of the program. So the needs of the evaluation, like setting up a program, are different if you are supplementing an existing program or completely setting up a new program. So like for the first ones, when you're supplementing an existing program, it's really important to evaluate that existing program, right? You want to know what's working, what can be improved, what systems and processes you have in place, and what kind of data you're already collecting. It's really just important to take a close look at what you have and what you can really leverage when expanding the program. So conducting an evaluation or reviewing existing evaluations of the program you will be supplementing is really important, because you want to make sure to identify and address any points of challenge before putting more stress on a system by expanding the program. So on the other side, there's the setting up a completely new program. And like you mentioned, Chad, there's a lot of things to consider, but like kind of three main things I want to highlight on the evaluation side are one, reviewing other similar programs and best practices. This can be very critical to help you save time and resources down the line, to anticipate potential challenges, include new innovations, things like that in your program that you're setting up. Because, understanding what is already out there can give you a good starting point. So you don't really need to reinvent the wheel with each brand new program that you would be setting up. And so like the question asked about, the community outreach, what kind of information and assistance are given in applications, right? That's a place where you can evaluate and review evaluations and best practices from other programs to help you set this up in a way that is going to best reach who you're trying to reach. And then so the second point I have is related to that, and just making sure you engage your intended population during program design and implementation. So like the other reviewing other evaluations and best practices, this is a way to help kind of anticipate some potential challenges or additional areas of assistance that the community may need, as well as defining evaluation measurements that may already be collected during the course of business, or making sure these measurements are defined in a way that doesn't put undue burden on the community in data collection. So an evaluation during the program and design and implementation phases can help save you time and resources down the line by accounting for a lot of things that may pose a issue or challenge down the line. And so again, most importantly is just making sure to engage the population, the communities that you are trying to reach. It can help to also cut through all of that noise of all of that excitement and competing stakeholders for a new program, to make sure that you are really defining what success looks like, relating to what is the true goal of this program. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on equity as well. And it is important to look at scoring and outreach and how you define success and the outcome. So this, again, is where evaluation really does become essential, right? Because you want to make sure and evaluate whether your scoring methodology, your outreach processes, how you're measuring your outcome is working as intended, and to track if the program is working in the equitable way it was intended. So program evaluation, as I'll probably continue to repeat today, can really help you save time and resources and improve program outcomes at every stage of the program's life cycle.
Kami, I really like what you said about engaging with stakeholders throughout the life of the program and evaluation, as such a critical part of informing both program design and implementation. And I think the other piece of stakeholder engagement is remembering to engage with internal stakeholders as well. A lot of program development or setting up a new program is about understanding what are the capabilities within the agency. For example, there are some agencies that don't necessarily have a history of receiving payments from the public, and when you're setting up a loan program, receiving the money back is an important part of it. The other thought I had on this topic was it's really a spectrum of of level of effort across new to existing programs. Sometimes you're completely revamping or completely redoing the existing program, and the extent of the changes is so large that you do need to have robust stakeholder engagement there, listening sessions, public sort of notices, And then you might consider implementing a new IT system for that or upgrading that. And then you need to engage with the public on how to use that. What are the pain points of the prior system that you want to make sure that you incorporate into the new one. And then there are some agencies like rural development that have a lot of grant and loan programs, and setting up a new program within that infrastructure is a lot more streamlined than going to an agency that doesn't really have a history or as many policies or regulations on what the process is.
We had another question come in. How do you track performance on the grant or loan?
Chad, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So I think there's kind of multiple ways that you can look at performance on a grant or loan. If you're constructing a business facility, you're going to look at the parameters that have set up, the financial parameters for that organization on whether or not they're providing receiving the type of funding, doing the type of manufacturing that they said, receiving the type of income and levels that they thought, revenue levels. If it's more of a infrastructure thing like a hospital, there's going to be all kinds of healthcare parameters that you could look at to see whether it's performing well. The broad healthcare of the region, but the number of people, patients visits, the types of medical care going on at the facility. If it's an education facility, you look at the number of students that pass through. So it's kind of a outcome output measurement system is the way I would describe it. Does anybody else have anything else to add to that?
Kami, I'm sure you have some. Oh, go ahead, Sam.
Oh, sorry, Sam. You can go first, Sam.
I was going to say that it's exactly making sure that you incorporate sort of the right mix of outputs and outcomes into the measurement so that ultimately the infrastructure is built for a certain purpose, and tracking success against that purpose is what we're ultimately looking for.
Yeah, I definitely was gonna say about the same thing there, Sam. It's really dependent on what the goal of the program, what the development is meant for, right? So if it is increasing access to healthcare, right? So you build a new hospital or you expand the services of an existing healthcare facility, right? So how many additional patients are you seeing? How many additional services are you able to offer? Things like that. And then there's also, I think, the hard numbers are a great measurement, but I also, as from a mixed methods perspective, I always like to include, potentially something a little bit more qualitative, right? How are the patients seeing the services that they're receiving? Are they happy with these services? Do they see the improvement in the services? Is this increasing their quality of life? So there's a lot of different ways you can include measurements, and it really does depend on what is your ultimate goal? What do you want to see the program improving or creating in a community?
Wow, thank you so much. I think this is like a whole nother webinar. We can spend some time talking about that. So I appreciate the question and also the answer. So Chad, you've had some good fortune to kind of work on and challenges to work on pandemic recovery programs that are really hastily put in place for reasons that we can talk about, and then of course programs that are really thought out and kind of give you a long kind of road to go. Now play on words on the infrastructure, but that was kind of where I was going. And so, can you give us with a mindset of an agency, staff member when they're looking at the differences between the two, the IAG programs versus recovery programs?
Absolutely, Kate. I think you kind of hit on it right in the beginning. A lot of the big substantial difference is the timing of those programs. With the Recovery Act programs, there was an emphasis on speed of the funding, making sure that the funds that were appropriated quickly got out and provided to the areas of the economy that so desperately needed it. Things like small businesses, healthcare providers, food processors. There was a real need to make sure that they got the dollars that they needed to continue to exist and provide the services that they do. So the primary importance was speed of funding for the Recovery Act programs. While the infrastructure programs tend to be very much a longer term investment, things like transportation, utilities, rail, those types of facilities have a long construction period, a long time of planning and investment. So you tend to then allow the program areas to have a longer time horizon in kind of setting up the programs, being more thoughtful about how they do it, making sure that the agency's program parameters, its processes, and its systems protect the taxpayers' dollars while still meeting the legislation's goals. So I think timing is probably the vast difference there, but there are also some other smaller differences as well. Both the Infrastructure Act and the Recovery Act had provisions that encouraged preferences for U.S. manufactured products, construction materials, iron and steel. But the Infrastructure Act, the IIJA, took it much further with the Build America, Buy America Act that was enacted as part of the IIJA. It required, starting in May 14, 2022, domestic content procurement preference for all of those infrastructure projects that were federally funded. And it also broadened out the definition of infrastructure project. It didn't just include rail and airports and bridges and that type of thing, roads. It broadened it out so that if you were a nonprofit or a public body or a tribal entity and you were applying for federal funding and you were constructing a building for a hospital or for a school or a local government building, that those buildings were also considered infrastructure project and carried those same preference requirements for construction materials, for iron and steel, and for manufactured products that are part of that building. So when those organizations then are going out and considering building a project, looking at those different Build America, Buy America requirements, certainly changed some of those aspects. It increased some costs, it increased some paperwork burden for those entities. And so they have to think about their scope of their project, whether to proceed with the project. So those types of things are now a bigger part under the Infrastructure Act than I believe they were under the Recovery Act. I'm not opposed to the Build America, Buy America Act. It does a lot of great things. It's just it is now part of the consideration for those projects. I think probably one last aspect that I would want to talk about as far as the differences between Recovery Act and Infrastructure Act would be the difference in back-end oversight. Because the Recovery Act had so much quick funding that went out the door, you end up having to have now a more thorough look at those projects to make sure that they went to eligible organizations for eligible purposes and in eligible areas, to make sure that the funding was used properly in the way that the government intended when they provided that funding through the program. The Infrastructure Act has got a longer time horizon, so the parameters are better set in place, the requirements are looked at, there's more data coming in on those projects, and there's a higher level of surety in the beginning that you're meeting those parameters. So I think what you'll see is a little bit higher unauthorized assistance and a little bit of additional clawback of federal funds under the Recovery Act than you would have seen under the Infrastructure Act. I think that's the primary aspects I can think of.
Thank you, Chad. We're getting some really good questions, and we just had another. How do you balance policymakers and stakeholders' need to see quick fixes when you implement a long-term grant or loan?
Can you repeat the question again? I want to make sure.
Sure. How do you balance policymakers and stakeholders' need to see quick fixes when you implement a long-term grant or loan?
So I'm balancing policymakers' needs. So when you have, like under the Recovery Act, and you have a request come in to create a new program to get that funding out the door quickly, you've got that need for expediency to move those funds quickly. And you, as a policymaker, you're looking at it and you're trying to make sure you get the right parameters in place to protect the government. You have to put a lot of effort right in up front to try and get the program as right as you can right out the door. It requires a lot of upfront work, a lot of additional effort, bringing in contractors, additional resources from around the agency to focus in on making sure your program parameters are well placed in the beginning would be the best initial thing you could do, I believe.
Thank you,
Great,
Chad.
you. Yeah, thanks. And anybody want to pitch in on any more on that? If not, we can go to next question or kind of piece. So Kami, we talked a bit about evaluation and performance measures already, but I wanted to kind of have you focus a bit more. This has been your professional focus for a while. And I'm wondering if you could share how you effectively plan for measuring the impact or the evaluation of a program. I think the key part I wanted to focus, if you could, is on planning and what that looks like from a Infrastructure Act type program.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually kind of want us to take a quick step into the Recovery Act programs, just to kind of set up what I'll talk about for IIJA. But like Chad mentioned, right, the Recovery Act programs were all about speed and urgency. We needed to get these funds out. The assistance was desperately needed, right? So this didn't give a lot of time for kind of what I talked about earlier with the review of other evaluations or similar programs or any of the best, like really a deep dive into potential best practices, like I discussed earlier, right? So we needed to get the funds out and we had a system we could do that. So now that an urgent need has kind of reduced, right? It's a really great opportunity, and I'd say a really important opportunity to evaluate these programs to inform the IIJA programs, right? We want to look at the Recovery Act programs to look at areas of success or friction. And so with like time and hindsight, can we really pinpoint areas for improvement that can help reduce fraud in the future, right? Is there what data is available to really understand the impact of the Recovery Act programs that, we don't have to do any additional data collection for, right? Can we use that going forward in the infrastructure programs? What can we see from the implementation and processes of the Recovery Act programs that would help the effectiveness and efficiency of the infrastructure programs going forward, right? So we really want to learn from what's been done to help build and kind of really intentionally make decisions around how we're going to measure and evaluate these Infrastructure Act programs, right? So we have that time that we didn't have in the Recovery Act programs. We can collect these lessons learned, the best practices, new innovations that may happen, right? We can be very deliberate and intentional and collect a lot of differing viewpoints on how to define and measure success of these programs. And we can be really intentional in building throughout the life cycle of the program different evaluations to continually learn and improve over time.
Amy, thank you so much. I love that word intentional. Sam, go ahead.
I think I have a few examples, I guess, of that. A continuous learning or taking lessons learned from programs to improve. I guess, for example, if you take the coronavirus relief program, that was sort of one of the earlier pandemic recovery programs, and then sort of Treasury took lessons learned from that, incorporated them into how it implemented the state and local fiscal recovery fund program, where there was more guidance early on from a program perspective on what funds can be used for or how reporting should go. They had more time to think as well. There was a spectrum, a progression, I guess, of these recovery programs where we started off with the CARES Act that was very really addressing a liquidity concern in some cases where recession just hit, people were strapped for dollars in cash. And in the future iterations, sort of like the 2021 consolidated appropriations and then American Rescue Plan, you started seeing more intentional programs that were focused a bit more around pandemic resilience. And then in some ways, they were down payments for programs that you see in the bipartisan infrastructure law, like the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund and Capital Projects Fund provided funding for broadband, for example, and then that sort of pass through the state. So it shares a lot of similarities with the BEAD and digital equity programs that are now being administered by NTIA through IHA. One other consideration, I guess, that for me differentiates the pandemic or the recovery programs from the IHA programs is the IT infrastructure around them. When you're moving so quickly, you don't have time to be as deliberative about designing the most user-friendly or best IT portal. You sort of do a quick inventory of what's available, what are the technologies that can be set up quickly, and get a lean process in hand, similar to what Chad was referencing, that you don't necessarily have that much time on the front end to do a deep evaluation or due diligence on everything. So in some ways, the information that you require up front, right, and the internal infrastructure doesn't need to be as robust. But then as you're building it out on the reporting side, you'll need a bit more information to be able to follow up and make sure that things are when the emergency is a little less urgent, you have a bit more time to evaluate for fraud, waste, and abuse, etc.
Yeah, no, great. Thank you so much, Sam. So, as we're moving, the Infrastructure Act was passed, I guess, about 6 months ago, and in some ways that's a long time, in some ways that's a short time, but I feel like now we're kind of moving a bit into the implementation phase of the programs that were initially in part of the act. Chad, can you give us a sense of kind of what's going on now? What agencies facing? Where are the stage are they at? What kind of things are they worrying about as far as the implementation phase?
Yes, happy to do so, Kate. I think the two biggest things that are going on right now, and one of them occurs across probably the whole timeline of program implementation, but it's staffing levels. Staffing levels are going to be an ongoing concern at all stages of the program development, but right in the middle of the process, you've got bringing on staff, making sure that they're well trained. You're beginning to have staff turnover. So I think staffing is probably one of your biggest concerns. The agency, I think, is much better off if the act, whatever act, provided appropriations for administrative fundings for additional staff for a new program. If you've got the additional funding, you don't have to look to cut programs back on other places or to cut funding in other places to kind of cobble together the funding to implement the new program. A lot of the newer programs now come with a percentage of administrative funds that allow for hiring of staff and hiring of contractors to move that assistance forward. I think it's also important as you look at a new program and establishing it, making sure that the type of staff that you're going to bring on kind of meet the time parameters of the program. And what I mean by that is if you've got a short-term program that's going to go in and do a one-time shot, you don't need long-term federal employees to come in and bring those on. It takes longer to bring them on, and they're usually then there after the program has ended. Instead, if you've got a short-term program, you bring in contractors and temporary employees. You staff up quick. You implement the program, you run it, and then you're able to then staff down quickly as well. But if it's a long-term change to a large program that's going to require additional demand and then additional staff, that's when you bring on contractors to get you started, and then go through the process of bringing on long-term federal employees that are there over the long term of that program. I think the other aspect that's probably significant would be systems development. Systems development at any federal agency on a new program is probably one of the costliest and also one of the most time-intensive activities that takes place. Many of our federal data systems are based on old, antiquated platforms. So the new data collections that come in require very significant system modifications. And to be honest with you, that's not very well received by the federal people in charge of it. It's really hard to do. It requires a lot of extra work and a lot of extra time. I think the good aspect that right now, this administration and I think the people up on the Hill and the Congress doing the appropriations are aware of the situation, and they're now providing some additional funding to allow for broader systems modifications, and also to bring on people that are very detailed experts in this space. I think you're seeing a lot of more chief data officers hired, a lot more data staff that are coming in and kind of falling into this space that are very helpful in making sure that our systems for new programs are going to be up and running.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. And so, Kami, I was thinking about it as Chad was talking that, the part of maybe lessons learned from previous, and maybe evaluations from previous, grant programs have let that happen. Let us say, hey, this is a factor in all of these different types of grant programs. Let's take a look at that. But do you have some comments to add to what Chad was just talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I definitely agree. Like, right, evaluations, this is the perfect situation for an evaluation, right? Understanding, identifying the and mapping the pain point areas, the areas of friction, areas of delay, in potentially in staffing or outdated systems, such as like could be something such simple as a document being stuck on someone's desk for too long for an approval, or challenges of data storage in an outdated system, right? An evaluation can really pinpoint these, how much is this delay costing in the program, right? What potential solutions can we have, right? So does that document being stuck on that one person's desk, is that the person that absolutely must sign the approval, or are there, 3 different people that could sign the approval? Is there, a way to kind of collect all the approvals into a faster process or something, right? So an evaluation can identify both where these points of friction are and potential innovations, or even where things may need to change based on a current environment, such as like advances in cloud computing, or even going remote during the pandemic, right? So an evaluation can really help to ensure that you are, one, reaching your intended population in the most effective and efficient way, and making sure that your environment, your system for this program is set up in a way to make the most of the resources, and be the most time and cost effective. I actually would like to kind of give a good example that I think really hits a lot of what evaluation can provide to a program. So I was able to lead an evaluation for the SBA's disaster assistance loan program mitigation option, right? And so they had the initial question of, this is a really great option for borrowers. They don't even need to have an additional application. Why are they not taking this option? Why are they not choosing the mitigation option in the way we expect, right? So we conducted initially a literature review, environmental scan, analyzed the loan data that they collect for the disaster assistance loan, and we conducted interviews with disaster survivors and disaster assistance loan program staff, and eventually developed a consumer journey map where we were able to pinpoint and identify areas for improvement to hopefully encourage borrowers to take this option, right? So, and we found that one challenge is that borrowers are having trouble understanding the communication around the mitigation option. So then we used cognitive testing with borrowers to help design an updated communication, which we then tested using an experiment with eligible borrowers in the loan program, and found that the improved communication did increase mitigation uptake. And, and that was provided, the SBA with kind of a potential innovation and solution moving forward to help, reach their goals around the mitigation options. So I think this is a really great example of how evaluation can really help a program in many different ways, right? From problem identification to a solution.
Great. Sam, do you have points you'd like to add to this issue?
Yeah, Kate, so I think some of the challenges that that I would expect in implementing the Infrastructure Act where it is right now is managing expectations from stakeholders, both the internal and external stakeholders. So external stakeholders are probably, at this point, your applicants are busy getting the materials together, applying, and usually there's a sense of, okay, now I'm done with my part. When's the money going to come to me? sometimes can take weeks or months to evaluate the entire pool of applications or requests you get from states or applicants. The other part is also managing stakeholders within the agency or even from the Hill on explaining that to do these and to implement these programs well, there's a lot of steps involved, and that given that this is intended to be more of an intentional programs, not necessarily like the early COVID relief programs, that there's a lot more process involved in implementation. The other challenge that they're probably facing is it's sort of exciting and nerve-wracking at the same time, is seeing how the design is playing out. So when you're standing up a new program, you sort of try to get everything right into the guidance or the NOFO, and then when you see things roll out or you see applications starting to come in or feedback from the public, sometimes there are some issues that you need to publish FAQs or amended guidance on, but other times things work out relatively well. But the challenge from the federal perspective is that you don't get a lot of redos here. You can't publish guidance and then go a completely different direction, because the stakeholders are implementing based on the guidance that has been published already. But the flip side to that is it's also an exciting time where you start hearing about the real projects that people are thinking of that implementing based on the program, the impact it can have on the communities. You get to see the end users or the communities it can affect, and that's the rewarding part, I think, of this implementation.
Yeah, no, this is great. Lisa, did you have a?
Yeah, I was just going to say, sorry, we just had another question come in. So what are you most worried about implementing the IIJA?
It's a really broad question. Maybe make it quick. We can kind of give like your top of your mind, having done these grant programs and loan programs over the years. If you are like sitting in your chair and you're like, I really need to talk to my friends over in this agency who are doing this program, what are you most worried about?
I'll take a stab.
Okay,
I think balancing that need for due diligence with not making things overly onerous, because the more onerous a program becomes, usually it's the less well-funded and less the more disadvantaged areas that eventually get disqualified or aren't able to participate in as fully as those communities that are better off.
Great, thanks, Sam. Chad, okay.
The people I've been talking to that are working on the Infrastructure Act programs, a lot of them are struggling with systems modifications at this point, making sure that the systems will handle the data that will be coming in around performance on these projects.
Kami, real-time concerns. What do you got?
Real-time concerns. Yeah, I think mine would be kind of a combination of what Sam and Chad said, right? So there's a really cool opportunity to collect a lot of data and really track how these programs are working over time. But there is also the need to really balance that burden and what the systems can handle and what the applicants can handle, right? How much additional time and labor they would need to put in to collect some of this data. So kind of balancing like what is really important and what we really want to track versus what is feasible.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. And Lisa, are there any more questions or did you want to jump in?
That is all that we have right now. So thank you.
Super. So thank you so much to our panelists for this wonderful webinar and this discussion about the Infrastructure Act and what we're going to be doing for loans and grants and how to think about those for implementation as evaluation and data collection. We also like to thank the registrants for joining us. Should you have any additional questions or comments for our staff, the panelists, please send an email to info@summitllc.us. And we will send out the webinar to you. I'm sure you have extra time to hear it all over again. And we appreciate everybody taking a listen. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.